Hydro works very well. It's a very steady, reliable resource, but it can vary a little bit month to month as well as year to year what the flows look like. The newer nuclear plants that we're looking at also are a lot more flexible and can also pair very well with, say, a significant renewable build out. And so together, we think that we have the possibility to create a very powerful system that can still be very reliable through all types of weather, all kinds of conditions, and still provide the lowest cost power to the region.
Welcome back to DAM, the official podcast of Northwest Hydropower. I'm your host, Austin Rohr, and I manage all things communications here at Northwest River Partners. Pump storage, hydrogen, energy efficiency, and microgrid technology. What do all of these things have in common? Well, for one, they're tools being explored and put to use as we strive towards achieving a future powered by clean energy. Secondly, and almost importantly, they've all been topics of discussion here on DAM. I know what you're thinking, none of those are hydropower, and this is a hydropower podcast. Or maybe you're not thinking that because you actually listened to all of those episodes, and you understand that A, pump storage is actually a type of hydropower, and B, all of these technologies, when paired with hydropower, work even better. There are still plenty more technologies for us to cover though, and one that I've been seeing a lot lately in the comments on social media, especially, is nuclear. Now, don't go and have a meltdown because this ain't your granddad's nuclear, all right? There have been significant advancements in nuclear technology, including these things called small modular nuclear reactors, which are quickly turning more and more eyes towards this technology. Today, we'll see if we can turn a few ears towards nuclear, and that's all made possible thanks to our expert guest, Greg Cullen, Vice President at Energy Northwest. So first off, Greg, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
All right, so as we always like to do, we try and start off this thing by getting to know a little bit about you and what you do. So what does the path to becoming Vice President at Energy Northwest look like?
Interesting question. I'm not sure I know what the path should look like. I can tell you mine has been a very strange and windy path, but a really rewarding one. I have actually spent my entire career with Energy Northwest, which coming up, I'm a couple months away from 30 years with Energy Northwest. I spent almost 25 years of that at Columbia Generating Station in a variety of roles, most of them in leadership roles, just moving through different parts of the organization. And then about 5 years ago, I came to the other side of our company, which we call Energy Services and Development. And so now I have responsibility for what I like to say is everything we do but Columbia Generating Station. So all of our non-nuclear generating assets, which we have several, and programs and services that we provide for our member utilities, other utilities, and other entities. It's one of the stories I like to tell is when I first was being introduced as moving over to Energy Services and Development, the then chairman of our executive board, Sid Morrison, broke into the introduction to say, Greg's the only one at Energy Northwest that writes his position description on his business card in pencil. And that's because, again, in my 30 years here, I think this is my 14th or 15th job title. So I've had the opportunity to move around, do a lot of different things, see a lot of different parts of the organization, and learn a lot. What's been really rewarding now is that for me, it's had a chance to come all together, and I'm using a lot of what I've learned over the years to bring together and try and develop all kinds of different programs, services, projects, and technologies.
Well, that all sounds good, and it sounds like I'm not going to get in trouble for calling you an expert then.
Well, I suppose you could say that. I am an engineer by degree, but I like to think that somehow I ended up being an extroverted engineer, so I like to talk about these things as well. And this is an area that I have a lot of passion around.
Well, we're glad to get your expertise and your thoughts today. And now that you're in that position, what exactly does the job as vice president entail?
Well, I guess, if you think about it, we have established, as we looked out over basically what we're facing as a region. And a few years ago, we started looking ahead to the focus on decarbonization that was clearly coming at us and gaining momentum and has clearly increased over time. We were looking at the same time at a lot of concerns around resource adequacy and making sure that we were going to have sufficient resources to meet our peak load times throughout the year. And we're also, as I think you probably know, we're in the midst of the Bonneville Power Administration's contracts expiring in 2028 and the process to sort of think, what do those look like? And so in a lot of ways, our member utilities and of course all of public power in the region, we're asking where is their power going to come from and what's that going to look like in a decarbonized system and one that we already have concerns about whether we have adequate resources. So when you mix all those together, there's some real challenges coming at us. And if you go back to the history of why Energy Northwest was created and what we are a joint operating agency of the state of Washington. And in simple terms, what that means is we're not a government agency, but we were established by statute and by the state government. But we are in essence public power. We were created to serve public power and serve the utilities of the region. And we are a not-for-profit entity. And so our intention is to do those things at cost and provide those in a way that provide the best benefit to public power in the region at the lowest cost. And so when you think about all those challenges that we're facing as a region, that sort of led us to think that, hey, it's really probably time for us to step up and increase more of what we're doing, get back to the original mission for which we were created, and play an important role. If you look back over the last 25 years or so, we have been leaders in developing a lot of clean energy technologies, including solar and wind and solar with batteries in the region. We've been early leaders on every one of those technologies. And we continue to do that and explore that and other things. We have been instrumental in helping develop out the electric vehicle charging infrastructure for the state in particular and the region. So we've been at the forefront of a lot of these things, and we set a vision for ourselves of leading the public power community of the Northwest through this energy transformation that's coming at us. So with that vision in place, you can think about, again, we have a vice president and chief nuclear officer who's responsible for Columbia Generating Station and making sure that we operate it safely, reliably, and predictably. We have corporate VPs that make sure all of our standard corporate support are being properly provided to everyone in the agency. But if you think about that vision of leading the Northwest Public Power community forward through this transition, really kind of falls on my organization, because again, we do all of the sort of programs and services and development of new programs and services and development of new projects, including generating projects and others. So kind of falls on my organization. And so I have the one department that operates our non-nuclear assets. I need to make sure that they're being operated safely and reliably and predictably. We have a environmental testing and analysis laboratory and a instrument standards calibration laboratory. I need to make sure they're operating effectively and that we're providing good low-cost service to those that want to use that. But then also that we're laying out the right strategic plans and business plans to kind of go develop the things that our members or other utilities are telling us they need and want for us to develop for them going forward. And so really a variety of things, but I guess it all comes down to, I have ultimate responsibility for making sure that we have the right things and right plans in place to go fulfill that vision and our company mission.
And so, I know we'll talk about nuclear a lot today, but for people trying to understand who Energy Northwest is, I mean, there's a lot more to it than just maybe that nuclear component that we're going to explore.
Yeah, I think, most people think of us as the company that operates Columbia Generating Station, the nuclear power plant, the only one within about 1,000 miles of here. And that's certainly a major part of what we do. But yes, we do other things. We have about 96 megawatts of wind in the 3 different phases of that project that we operate. We have hydro facilities that we operate, both our own and others that we operate and maintain for other utilities. We have a small solar project that again, was early of its kind back in the year 2000 when it went online. It was considered sort of utility scale demonstration, kind of, again, early of its kind. We recently developed a battery and solar project with a grant from the State Department of Commerce in Washington to help develop that technology. And again, it was kind of a first of its kind at that level. I mentioned some of the other things we do, including our electric vehicle charging station build out that we've done, and we've been involved in, I don't know, somewhere approaching probably 20 plus stations that we put around different arterials around the state. But again, even there are some programs that we do for our members. We have a workforce development program, and right primarily has been centered around an internship program for utilities that has really taken off over the last few years. Has been very popular with our members and has been very successful. We have recently started a program to help pursue grant funding. Obviously the state has a lot of funds now available for clean energy projects or other resilience projects. But the federal government, with the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, there are a lot of funding opportunities coming from the federal government as well. And so we put together a program to help our members pursue those funds, and has been very successful. We're already into tens of millions of dollars in grants awarded to member utilities through that project. So a lot of things that we can and do for utilities that want it. Again, ideally, we serve them in the way they want us to, and at cost for them to help them at the lowest cost.
And in terms of those member utilities, I know that we probably share a lot of members between the two of us, but maybe you could give our listeners particularly a better understanding of who some of those members would be. What does that membership base look like? Where are they located? What kind of size utilities are we talking about?
Well, many of your listeners might know this, but I'll say it anyway. First of all, you can divide utilities into two main categories: investor-owned utilities that have usually stock shareholders that expect to make a profit off that utility, and then consumer-owned utilities, which are really what I refer to when I'm saying public power, and those are utilities that are basically created simply to serve the needs of their members or customers. And our by statute requirement, our membership is all public power. It's all public utility districts or municipalities in the state of Washington. But participation in our programs and projects is not limited to our members. So we have a total of 92 different utilities that participate in our projects across 6 different states. Kind of centered here in the Northwest, but obviously spreading out. And so our joint operating agency structure allows us to be very flexible in what and who and how we serve for that reason. But our primary focus is around public power, and particularly our members. There are 28 public utility districts and municipalities in Washington that are current members of Energy Northwest. That is almost all of the public utility districts that do electric power for their members, and I think it's a large majority of the municipalities that do that as well.
So I guess the big question now is about the nuclear side of things. What is the rundown on that project?
Well, I guess let me back up a little bit on that. It was 2010 was the first time we had a group of utilities, including an investor-owned utility outside of our membership, that came to us and funded a project for us to go sort of research the possibility of developing new nuclear in the region. It's interesting to me to think that there were utilities as early as 2010 that had the vision to realize that we might need something like this in the future. That study really sort of led us to a long-term partnership, both with NuScale and helping them develop their small modular reactor technology, and then leading into a partnership with UAMPS, the Utah Associated Municipal Power System, which is also a joint operating agency like Energy Northwest, but obviously headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah. But we partnered with them in the development of their carbon-free power project, which intends to deploy the NuScale technology in Idaho, down on a site on the Idaho National Lab footprint, if you will. And we partnered with them for many years to help them develop that project, and with the idea that we would be the intended operator of that project. And so we've spent a long, since again, as early as 2010, sort of thinking about and exploring what would the development of nuclear in the region look like. In 2020, right about the time that a study that we commissioned around having adequate resources in the region, that was performed by E3, who's done many of the other studies similar in the region. About the time that study came out, and concluded that the lowest cost decarbonized system is one that includes nuclear as a major clean, firm resource, as well as, I would add, keeping all the hydro that we currently have. Um, uh, there was also in the federal appropriations bill that year, direction from Congress to the Department of Energy to go create a program to build 2 new reactor technologies in this country by the end of the decade. And that was a surprise to even us in the industry when that came out. And you think about what that represents, right? As early as 2020, bipartisan support and direction, then signed by the president to go develop this program and go build 2 new technology reactors. We ended up being a part of both of the winning awards for those projects. One of those was won by TerraPower, and that's Bill Gates' nuclear company, headquartered in Bellevue, Washington. And they are right now developing a sodium-cooled reactor technology that is going to be deployed in Wyoming on a retiring coal site. And they're doing that for PacifiCorp, investor-owned utility that actually has utility in Washington, Oregon, and California, as well as another one in kind of the Idaho, Utah, kind of Wyoming area. And they intend to deploy that technology and take it over. But TerraPower is having to develop not only the technology, which is kind of their expertise, but the operational maintenance training strategies for that technology. And so we are consulting with them right now and helping them through that path and helping them develop that. But we were also a part of the award for X-Energy, a different technology that has really become our focus. It's a high temperature gas cooled reactor, and also very modular. But sort of falls in what they call the advanced reactor technology categories, like the TerraPower one does. So we have diverted our focus away from the UAMPS and NuScale project towards these 2 because of the amount, again, the significant focus that required. But we have pushed our focus primarily on the X-Energy technology as the one that we think is probably the best fit for a future Northwest grid. And so that project has taken several sort of turns again over time. Initially, again, that Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, which is the federal name for that program, was intended for that X-Energy project to be built here in the state of Washington. But that since has transitioned to, with our full participation in this decision, by the way, many people have characterized this as sort of us losing this project, if you will. But in working with X-Energy, we came to believe that the better approach was for Dow Chemical, who was very committed to building an X-Energy 4-module project to provide both electricity and process heat for a facility of theirs in Texas. We felt it was better for them to have the lead on that first project. You can imagine that utilities often are not flush with cash. Public power utilities in general operate at very tight margins, again, trying to keep their rates down for their customers. And so, we have to finance anything we do. Whereas an entity like Dow Chemical has a lot more access to capital and to be that first moving project. And so we like the idea of being right behind them. So our goal right now is to develop an X-Energy project here in the state of Washington on about a 2-year time lag behind the Dow project, so that we can take all the real learnings from that project and translate them directly to our project in the hopes of improving both the predictability of the schedule as well as cost as we move forward with that. So we are been moving down that path. We've been working on this X-Energy project since 2020, as I mentioned. Quite a bit of work has gone on in that. We know a lot more today than we did then, and we have put together a very, very strong, capable staff to help lead us through this. We have probably somewhere in the order of 11 utilities that have sent us formal letters of interest, identifying a certain number of megawatts they might be interested in. We have about 13 utilities, and that Venn diagram does not completely overlap with the 11, but there are about 13 utilities that have provided us some forms of funding to help kind of fund a feasibility study on this, which is kind of what we're in the phase of right now. Now we have other utilities that have expressed some real interest around this. And I guess just what I would say, Austin, bottom line, what we have heard many times from many utilities is that they acknowledge we're going to need a technology like this in the region. And while it might seem daunting and challenging to think about the idea of building new nuclear projects here in the region, it's pretty well acknowledged we're going to need something like this. And so a lot of interest, a lot of urging forward from us and for us, and a lot of support towards trying to have us really continue to develop the information we need to make the right decision on whether we should actually go forward with the project.
I interrupt this podcast to bring you an advertisement from none other than ourselves. What if the Northwest suddenly lost all hydropower? Half of our local energy would immediately disappear and be replaced with dirty fossil fuels. Greenhouse gases would rise, along with our electric bills. Because without hydropower, 80% of the Northwest's renewable energy would be gone. Thankfully, hydropower remains abundant, affordable, and 100% carbon-free. Our power is water. Learn more at northwestriverpartners.org. Now, back to your favorite water power podcast. Well, I think that really speaks to, what I've been seeing as well with the amount of people that are bringing this up on social media, for example. It seems that, it's caught on with the energy leaders. It's now starting to get into the eye of the general public and the policymakers, and it's gaining some significant traction. I mean, do you have maybe some thoughts on why that traction has picked up so much? I mean, is it just people coming to understand our energy needs are greatly increasing in the near future, or is it maybe the coming to understand better the new nuclear technology and the changes that have been made to maybe reduce some of the fears people have had in the past?
Well, I think, Austin, it's all of the above. I would say that probably the most significant driver for what I would say is a significant change in the tenor and tone around nuclear and the volume, if you will, is the decarbonization push, right? For many people, this is, I mean, it's becoming an overused term, but if you think about it, it's pretty powerful. This is an existential crisis, right? For our planet, for our kids, for our grandkids, we have to do something to decarbonize, and of course, even now it's law in Washington, Oregon, and California, right, that we're going to decarbonize. So that has put a certain different spin on where our power comes from and what it looks like, and I think that what I've seen is that people, particularly, I'd say those that are under, say, 60 in particular, certainly under 45 or 35, that decarbonization push, as part of a concern of climate change, has caused people to be so much more open to anything that can help with that. It's fascinating, Austin. What we've seen is, about 4 years ago, we regularly do, because of Columbia Generating Station, we regularly do surveys around public perceptions on nuclear and try to learn what we can about what people are thinking and what information they might want or need from us. About 4 years ago, we did a survey across the state of Washington. And what we found was pretty consistent with what we had been finding, what we see across the country back then. Just over 50% of people kind of said, yeah, generally I support nuclear. What was fascinating about that, though, is only 25% thought other people supported nuclear. So one problem nuclear's always had is that everybody sort of assumes A lot of people are against it, and so no one wants to bring up the topic or have the conversation, despite the fact that it's not necessarily the case. But what's fascinating is we redid that survey about a year ago, just 3 years later. Same firm, same set of questions, same basic approach across the state of Washington. So no difference there. And now what we found is the general support for nuclear that was just over 50% is now 73%. That's a stark shift in just 3 years. And I like to joke about, I don't know about you, but show me anything else in this country right now that 73% of people will agree on, right? But so to have that for nuclear, I think is really compelling, but it's telling again when you look about that kind of shift. We're seeing that nationwide as well. Other polling and stuff done nationwide is showing similar surges in support for nuclear. But again, I think it's about the need. Hey, if I can't use gas or I can't use coal or I don't want to use gas and coal anymore, I think people are understanding that wind and solar and batteries have their place, but they're too variable and undependable to rely on to make sure that on the coldest days of winter and the hottest days of summer, I'm going to have sufficient power. It turns out one of the things that came out of our study, Austin, it turns out that in the Northwest and particularly in Washington and Oregon, the way our weather system works around here, if you have a really hot day or a really cold day, it's because you have a temperature inversion. And a temperature inversion also means you're least likely to have wind. And in the winter, solar. So, it turns out that wind and solar, while they certainly have a role to play, the more we need them, the least likely we are to have them. And so I think people are recognized that the variability of those technologies does lead us to need something else that's clean and controllable, or firm is a term we use. I know I can turn it on and turn it off when I need it. I'll give you one other quick story on this because I think this is just so powerful. We started working with a consultant recently who's used to kind of doing campaigns and messaging, and we wanted some advice. She said, "Hey, I'm interested in doing this," and she had a strong passion around the climate and around doing something to decarbonize and try to make a difference. But she said, really, I'm kind of lost hope that we can do what we need to do in a timeline that's going to make a big enough difference to really change the course of the climate on the planet. And so she had kind of lost some hope. And when she first started thinking about supporting nuclear, she said, hey, if this could help, great. I'm interested in helping with that if it could help make a difference. But as she started doing her own research and studying these newer technologies, as you said, Austin, in the open, this isn't your grandfather's nuclear. And as she started realizing the advancements we had made in the technologies and how we were trying to approach it, she really had what she actually calls almost a conversion experience. She now thinks maybe there's hope, that maybe we can do something fast enough and powerful enough to make a difference and turn the tide, because we have an energy dense, large scale resource like nuclear that's clean and also can make sure I have plenty of power on the system when I need it. And so it's been interesting watching her journey as she has learned about that and really has had, again, a pretty powerful experience. But I think that's not atypical of what we're seeing in a lot of places around the country. I mentioned already the federal activity around the ARDP, but there's been activities recently as well that show, again, very, very strong bipartisan support in Washington, D.C. around the need to develop these technologies. Again, show me anything in Washington, D.C. right now that has very strong bipartisan support. I can only name one, and it's the need to develop nuclear. And we're seeing that move throughout the state leadership as well. And throughout non-governmental organizations that maybe traditionally have been sort of opposed to nuclear, we're seeing shifts in their thought processes. Even in tribal groups who are concerned about the land use associated with a major solar and wind build out, we're seeing much more interest or even support for nuclear than what we've seen in the past.
Maybe for that other 27%, right? Those that still get nervous about the idea of nuclear, what might you say to those folks?
Yeah, very good. Well, a couple things. First of all, I'll go back to Bill Gates' recent, I guess recent, it's a couple years old now, I think, but his book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, he has some interesting things in there where he talks about nuclear. And he uses an analogy of the automobile. When the automobile first came out, you can probably imagine that these things were not perfectly safe. People were getting injured in accidents or things all the time with this. Well, we didn't decide to abandon the automobile as a resource for us. Instead, what we did is put our ingenuity to making them safer and more reliable. And so you think about where we are today with automobiles compared to when they first came out, right? I have I have airbags, I have seat belts and airbags and side airbags, and I have backup cameras and sensors that tell me if I'm backing into something. There are all kinds of features that we've added now to make automobiles a lot more safe than they used to be. And so Bill's point was, hey, why don't we do the same thing with nuclear? It's so important to what we're trying to accomplish. We're just trying to put our ingenuity as a country into making these things simpler, better, smarter, and safer, and hopefully cheaper to operate, build and operate. And so if you think about these technologies, I'll focus, well, almost every one of what you hear these days as small modular reactors, advanced reactors, or even some of the newer large scale light water reactors like the ones built down in Georgia recently and just coming online. All of these have advancements in how they address safety. Now, I personally believe that all nuclear reactors in this country are safe, but a lot of them historically, like Columbia Generating Station, rely on significant redundancy in the safety systems that will make sure we can get water into the core to keep the fuel cool. These newer designs don't rely on that. They use passive approaches to making sure for light water reactors, making sure that you keep water around the core. For like the TerraPower sodium fast reactor, sodium is liquid at the temperatures you'd be at, right? It doesn't boil off, it doesn't operate at a high pressure. So there's nothing that would cause the coolant to disappear and have the fuel melt. The X energy technology and some of the other technologies that are being developed right now are using a different form of fuel. And this fuel cannot melt. And if you can't melt the fuel, then you can't release any sort of radionuclides or fission products out to the environment, which has always been the big concern with nuclear. So, I guess the simplest thing is, and obviously the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has to buy off on these designs and buy off on these claims, but our belief is that we have eliminated the thing that you're worried about with nuclear from a safety standpoint. So if that's the case, then why would we be as concerned about building these technologies? The other issue that comes up a lot is, well, what about the waste? And I think when people say that, near as I can tell from conversations, is generally they're talking about the used fuel. And used fuel from nuclear power plants, no question, is very highly irradiated and has to be safely stored and protected from it for many, many, many years. But even if you look at the existing fleet and you look at Columbia Generating Station, I could bring you out to our site and show you where the fuel is stored right now. And it's stored in giant concrete casks that sit out on a concrete pad. Those casks are designed to withstand the impact of a 747 airliner. They're designed to withstand an earthquake and not fall over. They're designed, if they did fall over, they're still okay. They sit out there passively cooled. They don't need anything to be done to them. And I always tell people that, listen, I mean it when I say that I would have my kids stand next to those casks and hug them because there's no radiation coming out of those casks. We have the technology. We know how to safely store used fuel. One conversation I had with an individual once, we kind of got around to, hey, I operate solar panels. I told you I operated some that have been in service since 2000. Some of them have started to fail. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to put those panels now, but they contain mercury and other chemicals. I don't think I'm supposed to just put those in the ground or send them to the landfill. I don't know where I'm supposed to store those either. Same thing with giant wind turbine blades. Same thing with the batteries I just put in service. They're expected to have a life around 20 years. When they're done, I don't know where to put those that's safe storage, and we don't have right now the ability to recycle those things in this country. So, we face waste issues, if you will. We face upfront mining and land impact issues to create these technologies. We face land use issues, particularly, again, the significant land use around wind and solar. We face back end issues too. Nuclear is the only technology right now that by law is required to fund for decommissioning that resource as part of its operating costs. Other technologies don't. So if someone feels a project is done, they have the right to just walk away in some ways. I think we face these kinds of issues on all these technologies. But on nuclear in specific, we know how to store it safely. We know how to deal with it. But also what I will tell you is that I think we, in this country, it's time that we start getting serious again about talking about recycling used fuel. There is a lot of valuable energy left in the fuel that we store and could continually be recycled and reprocessed. There's a company that we've been working with that believes there's enough value in the fuel that it's a commercially viable option to go recycle that fuel. And that when they're done recycling the fuel that we have, like say at Columbia Generating Station, that you end up with 4% of the volume started with that has to be disposed of. The rest of it can all be reused in other forms or processes. So I think that's a more responsible way for us to think about recycling or dealing with the waste going forward as well. And something that the federal government started to invest more money in studying and working on as well. So those are probably the primary things I would say. Give us a chance, help try to understand again the technology advancements we've made in how these reactors are designed and operated. The other thing that we hear a lot then is, okay, well, the big concern now is the cost, right? Nuclear projects are notorious for going over schedule and over cost, and that's very fair. And we as an industry have earned that reputation the hard way. I will tell you a couple things. First of all, I think we think the modularity approach of these designs allows us to manufacture more of the components in factories and bring them to the site, allows us to do things more repetitively and bring the learnings from one construction to the next module. We have been able to build nuclear projects on time in other countries. So we just have to get around some of our licensing and permitting hurdles that can make things more difficult in this country. But also I will tell you that, listen, 20 years ago, renewables were not competitive from a price standpoint either. They've been greatly subsidized by the federal government over that time and continue to be. And that has allowed the technologies to get going, for the price curve to come down as supply chain is built up and as construction of these projects has grown and been perfected. Natural gas plants in this country have gotten to the point where they are able to be built pretty quickly because we kind of know the basic recipe and formula and plan for how you do that. So, I'm not naive. I will tell you that the early movers on these projects are likely to have challenges, are going to take a little longer than we need and cost a little more than we want them to. But we have to clear that hurdle so we can start bringing the cost curve down for those as well. I got some numbers recently that I thought were sort of startling. If you look back since 1950, nuclear is $100 billion with a B dollars behind renewables and batteries in terms of subsidies from the federal government. And the only subsidies really received in most of that were research to national lab type organizations. So, I think it's good that the federal government is stepping in and trying to help, but I think there's probably more they can and will do for us to help bring these cost curves down. But we as a nation need to face those first few, get through them and take those learnings and apply them to the next ones so that we can get in the habit of doing this on budget and on schedule. But one quick story I'll throw in there. The plants that were built down in Georgia that are just coming online now, are notorious for their headlines of being almost double in estimated cost and way over schedule. But I had a conversation with one of another joint operating agency down in Georgia that is one of the major members and participants in one of those reactors. And I asked him, I said, knowing all that you know now, um, are you glad you did this? And his answer was very quick and unequivocal, absolutely. He said, we understand the decarbonization pressures. We're starting to see decarbonization requirements coming through the southeast portion of the United States. And our members now have a long-term 60 to 100-year asset that's going to provide clean, firm, reliable power as we try to decarbonize and get off of gas and get off of coal. And that's a major benefit for them. And the costs that they end up with and are paying are not that bad compared to what they originally estimated, despite what you see in the headlines because of some low-cost loans they were able to get from the federal government for part of it. And so he absolutely believes that in the end, he's glad that they did that for their member utilities.
So I want to ask you a really basic question now, but I think it's an important one to maybe lay the groundwork for as well, just so that people understand a little bit better. There's sort of the difference between the next generation of nuclear and the more traditional nuclear plants maybe people are familiar with. And then there's also, the different sort of scales of that technology. And the one that gets brought up so often, particularly, is the small modular reactors. Could you explain maybe what, an SMR is and how it differs from, say, any number of the other sort of plants that we've been discussing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, the traditional mantra or way of thinking in nuclear has been bigger is better. There are some costs that come with building a nuclear project. For example, putting a fence around the plant and having a security force to protect that plant. Those costs are the same whether I'm putting out 1,200 megawatts or 600 megawatts. And so traditionally, the kind of idea has been the bigger is better in a sense. I'd rather have 1,200 megawatt reactors, maybe even 1,400 megawatt reactors. I'd rather have 2 or 3 of them on the same site. So again, I can take advantages of some economy of scale. And there's some real good reason for that thinking, and I'm not saying that reasoning is wrong, but those construction projects are very, very difficult. You talk about significant amount of excavation, and then you're forming up and pouring significant concrete base mats and then concrete walls up into the air, and then you got to backfill that dirt very specially, and that's very expensive, time-consuming construction with a lot of things that can cause delays. And so trying to figure out how do we do that better? How can we do the construction maybe faster and better? So a small modular reactor technically is under 300 megawatts, 300 megawatts or less in terms of generation output. That's sort of the official definition. Now, there's also a term you may have heard of, micro reactors, which are basically 10 megawatts, sometimes 50 I hear, but 10 megawatts or so or less is kind of what we think of in terms of micro reactors. And so those are sort of the different categories we put things in. Advanced reactors is kind of a term used for non-water cooled reactors like the sodium fast reactor, the X-energy gas cooled reactor, some of these other technologies, even though those have been operated in this country before and are decades and decades old and have a lot of experience. And some of those could be, technically small modular as well. For example, the X-energy design can be kind of both. But I think the Nuclear Regulatory Commission actually sort of limits SMRs to water cooled, but we'll use them for the broader term. So the concept here again is what about if by going smaller, we can make more components in a factory and bring them to the site? What if our construction techniques get more simple then, and they can be more smaller and then more replicated as you learn in a modular fashion to lead to better construction techniques. So that's the concept that has kind of led to a focus on kind of that small modular approach. The other thing that could be a challenge with a 1,200 megawatt reactor is that's a big chunk of power put on the system at once. A lot of, you have to have a pretty big need for that. And about the time you get to that big a need, still putting 1,200 megawatts on the system at once can sort of suddenly mean you have too much power. So modularity also allows more of a slower growth pattern and more optionality, if you will, to sort of add as you need a little bit more closely to your load growth than in such big chunks. So that's another advantage that has been talked about for quite some time. So that's kind of the concept. Still has to be proven, but I find it interesting that if you look at like the NuScale and the X Energy designs, both of them end up right around 75 to 80 megawatts of output per module. And that's not actually a coincidence. What they did there is they started with what's the biggest module I could fit on a rail car, and let me go from there to decide the size of output. And so I think that kind of thinking is what's helping us believe that there are ways that this could be much simpler and more like maybe again natural gas plants or other things to go build than some of this traditional super mega project.
And then on the flip side of things, you mentioned the Columbia Generating Station, which I understand is currently the only commercial nuclear facility in the Pacific Northwest, and that is based on the traditional nuclear plant technology. What kind of future do you see with that plant as more investments being made, maybe on the kind of new nuclear side?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, I spent almost 25 years of my career at Columbia Generating Station. And so it's easy for people to say, well, of course he's pro-nuclear, but keep in mind that means I raised a family in the Tri-Cities around a nuclear power plant as well. And so you can imagine that early in my career, I had to decide if I thought nuclear was safe. And I have clearly concluded that nuclear is safe. The way we design and operate and regulate nuclear in this country, no question in my mind that nuclear is safe in this country. Um, the future I see for resources like Columbia Generating Station, I think we have to keep them operating, and we have to keep them operating well into the future. I'll keep this localized for now. Again, if you think about the Northwest, Columbia Generating Station's license has already been renewed for an additional 20 years over its original 40-year license. And so that means right now that Columbia's license will expire in 2043. So if you think about a Washington state goal of 100% clean power by 2045, and oh, by the way, Oregon, 100% clean by 2040, and you think about 1,200 clean, firm megawatts, 2043 is probably a really bad time to remove those from the system. And so we think that Columbia should have its license renewed for another 20 years. And that process is well proven out with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the kinds of programs and inspections and tests that you have to put to make sure it can continue to operate safely are well established and well proven. Just about every reactor in the country has already received an extension of its initial license, and a few have already received a second extension or renewal of their license for an additional 20 years to get to 80. There are several utilities in this country that are making serious plans to operate their entire nuclear fleets at least 80 years, if not 100 years. When you go look at the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy issued a report in March of this year as part of a larger effort they've been making to study, what's it going to take for us to be successful in decarbonizing. And so this report is called the Pathways to Commercial Liftoff, and this particular one is for advanced nuclear. What they said is their studies, their analysis says that we need to add 200 new megawatts of nuclear in this country by 2050. Now that's a huge number. The existing fleet of reactors in this country is somewhere around 100 megawatts. Some may be surprised to know it's that big, but it's about 100 megawatts. So if you think about the need to triple the amount of nuclear generation that we have in this country by 2050, that's already a significant lift for us as a country. And but removing any of the existing fleet is just going to make that much more difficult. So I think it's really important that we maintain the existing fleet. I believe they can operate safely and reliably for easily another 40 years. And I think we need to keep that. If you think about Columbia Generating Station, 1,200 megawatts is a lot of power, and we could add another 20 years to that reactor for really what is an incredibly, relatively inexpensive cost. I just think it would be foolish for us as a region in the midst of trying to decarbonize our entire system and the amount of build out that we're going to have to do in all kinds of new resources to take a resource like that, to take any reliable resource that's very cost effective today, and I would include our hydro system in that, to take it out of the system at the time that we're trying to decarbonize it and keep it reliable and affordable, I think is making a mistake.
You also mentioned the safety thing, right? And being in the Tri-Cities over there. I think a lot more people now after this summer are going to be familiar with that based on Oppenheimer. It was a big movie that came out and explored the Manhattan Project, and the Hanford site is obviously a huge part of that, which is not far from the Tri Cities. And then you have the Columbia Generating Station, which is out there as well. What is it like to kind of work on nuclear in a place with the kind of history that the area has?
Well, I'll tell you, Austin, I really appreciate that question. It's a two-edged sword, okay? On the positive side, the Tri-Cities community is very educated on nuclear and what it means and how you work with it and around it and what it takes. And so what we find in our immediate community is nothing but support, both for Columbia Generating Station and its continued operation, but also for this idea of developing new nuclear. Let me just take a quick right turn for a second. You think about that community in Wyoming, where Pacific Core and TerraPower are developing their nuclear project. That was a community staring at the fact that the loss of that coal plant in their community was going to devastate the jobs and the economy and likely the community. And now you're talking about an ability to repurpose those people, repurpose that facility, and save that community. And that has led to major support throughout the state. Well, I think in the Tri-Cities, we see the same thing, right? A large portion of the Tri-Cities right now, economy and employment is around the cleanup effort associated with Hanford. The Hanford, as you alluded to, the Hanford reservation was about creating weapons, plutonium over time. But that now has a major cleanup effort associated with it to decommission that facility. But our community is looking ahead to what about when that cleanup effort's done? We have a lot of really highly skilled nuclear workers. We have a lot of nuclear knowledge and experience that we want to leverage. And we want to leverage it to develop these new technologies. And we'd like to bring some of the supply chain for that to the region as well. I have to give credit to Sandra Haynes, the chancellor of Washington State University Tri-Cities. She coined this phrase that has really taken off in the community, and that is clean up to clean energy, right? We see the opportunity to transition from being a community focused on cleaning up the Hanford Reservation to one that's centered around helping develop all forms of clean energy for the region. Pacific Northwest National Lab is the energy storage lab for the National Lab System and does other clean energy analysis and research. So we see a real opportunity, and our community has rallied around this idea, rallied around this vision. I tell people that, quite frankly, in my immediate region, I get more push to move faster and get a project built here than I do face any sort of opposition to having one built in our community. And so that's the level of understanding and support that we get from our community pushes forward. By the way, I should note that recently the Federal Department of Energy issued a whole initiative on using federal lands, particularly energy reservations like Hanford, to develop clean energy. And the Secretary of Energy labeled that the Clean Up to Clean Energy project, having stolen that from Sandra Haynes. But anyway, but the other side of that sword really is that, as you get further away from the Tri-Cities community, it's easy for people to mix what happened at Hanford and the waste and the cleanup needs that were created as part of a weapons race with Columbia Generating Station. And while we lease land on the Hanford Reservation from the Department of Energy, as I mentioned earlier, our waste forms are all solid. We know how to store them. We know they're very different than what's out at the Hanford and came from the weapons production. And so that's something that we have to deal with all the time. is helping people understand the difference, that none of the waste that's being cleaned up or dealt with on the Hanford Reservation is because of Columbia Generating Station and what we and our operation. So that the further we get from the Tri-Cities, and especially as you get sort of the west side of Washington and Oregon, the more we see that confusion and have to work to try to clear that up. Not to mention, I guess we're all sort of in a, suffering from the Simpsons, 20 some years of the Simpsons, right? Where everybody pictures 55-gallon drums with green fluorescent goo oozing out of it. And of course, that is completely fictional and has nothing to do with the operation of a plant like Columbia Generating Station. But didn't do us any favors, I'll just say that.
There's no three-eyed salmon swimming up the Columbia or Snake anytime soon.
There's no three-eyed salmon, but because again our community has accepted the some of the misnomers, there's actually a restaurant in town called Three-Eyed Fish. So
Somebody's clever there.
yeah, like I said, we sort of embrace our past and acknowledge people's misunderstandings.
Certainly. I find a similar thing. I think the Tri-Cities people are real energy experts because when we go out there for community events, like we got Riverfest coming up here pretty soon, we'll be out there once again. And, people out there understand similarly the hydropower issues so well, right? I mean, they're totally tuned into what's going on with the dams and why they want them there and how much of a important asset they are to the community and Eastern Washington as a whole. I have to ask, being that it is a hydropower podcast and it's, got to get a hydropower question in there somewhere, right? Do you see opportunities for hydro and nuclear technology to be used to benefit one another in some way? And is there a way that we could pair sort of these technologies to better benefit the community as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me go back and say, Austin, we're doing it today. If you look at the Bonneville Power Administration's system that they operate, the power that they take and sell to utilities in the region, it is a combination of the hydro on the Columbia and the Snake and Columbia Generating Station. Bonneville Power Administration gets all the power from Columbia Generating Station and pays all the costs. And that system together gives us a significant advantage in this region, right? Not only has it given us some of the lowest cost power in the country, but think about it, it's given us some of the cleanest power in the country as well. So we are very well positioned because of that. What's interesting is, at a high level, when people think about something like hydropower, it is easy to think about the fact that, well, that water is always in the river. It's always moving. But as you well know, Austin, that doesn't mean that every month of the year has the same flows of water as others do. And so if you look at an average year, every other year, I should say, every other year, every 24 months, Columbia Generating Station shuts down for somewhere a little over a month to refuel and do significant amount of maintenance on the system. Well, how can you possibly take 1,200 megawatts off the system at any time? Well, because when we do it in usually starting in early May and going out through mid-June, when the runoffs are just starting to hit the river heavily. Okay, and oftentimes at that point, Bonneville has plenty of power, and if anything, at times has had more power than they need because of the flows that start coming down through that. But then as you get later in the year, you start getting into late August, right? Those flows have decreased significantly. There's still plenty of water in the river, but they aren't to the same level they once were. And the flexibility of what power they could put out isn't quite there. But now you've got Columbia back online, ready to go and powering through those times when the hydro flows are a little bit lower. And so, it's already a very strong partnership. They work very well together. And what we have found recently, Austin, is anytime the weather gets a little cold or a little hot and power starts to get just a little tighter, we get direction from the Bonneville Power Administration to minimize maintenance or activities that could possibly cause the reactor to trip offline. As you can imagine, a nuclear power plant that with all of its safety systems can be very sensitive, and it doesn't take a whole lot to cause the thing to trip offline and have to be restarted. And those are for safety reasons. So they ask us, please don't mess with anything, because this resource, if it came off right now, would be a major challenge to us. But at the same time, the hydro system allows us to have flexibility at times we need to ramp up power for short-term windows. So they already work together very, very well. You take any one of them out of the system and it's not going to work as well. And we see that as for the future. The future is going to be the same way. Hydro, like I said, hydro works very well. It's a very steady, reliable resource, but it can vary a little bit month to month, as well as year to year, what the flows look like. The newer nuclear plants that we're looking at also are a lot more flexible and can also pair very well with, say, a significant renewable build out, just like the hydro system can. And so together, we think that we have the possibility to create a very powerful system that could still be very reliable through all types of weather, all kinds of conditions, and still provide the lowest cost power to the region.
I also have to ask you about the costs that you touched on. And I know that we've discussed the Inflation Reduction Act a little bit here today. When it comes to that act, do you feel that it did enough in terms of kind of covering you know, the incentives and everything like that? I mean, you mentioned there's that huge gap there. Um, or is it something that we're going to need a lot more incentives and policies moving forward to ensure that we can keep not only the existing nuclear power safe, but also be able to build out these new plants as well?
I guess we will see. I think that the Inflation Reduction Act and offering those tax credits to nuclear were a huge step forward. Again, it's part of what allowed us to believe that we could move the ARDP to Texas and still do a second project here for a reasonable cost. Um, you may be aware that for the first time, that act also allowed non-federal tax-paying entities like public power to have access to those benefits as well. So that was a game changer. So it has gone a long way towards making this feasible. But as I alluded to earlier, for these first few projects, it still probably isn't quite enough. If you think about it, those tax credits I talked about that are being offered to nuclear are also being offered to renewables and batteries, right? So in a sense, you could argue that we now have equality in the sense that we're both getting the same thing, but we don't have equity in the sense that we're still $100 billion behind on the nuclear side of things from what we have received on the renewable side. So there's still an inequity that needs to be resolved in my mind. There are, as I mentioned, the DOE document that came out in March. There are a lot of activities still going on in Washington, D.C. to figure out what else needs to be done. I think right now, probably one of the things that needs to be done that seems to be most likely is some form of the government taking some of the back end risk, the cost overrun risk, if you will, to help make sure that we know that if we do set out on these projects and things don't go quite as smoothly as we'd like, that we can still finish the projects and with minimal impact to the participating utilities. I think there are some other things that need to be done in some simpler ways that can help move things forward. And then there's a lot of activity in DC right now around trying to make improvements to the licensing process and the environmental permitting processes around these technologies. I guess the way I would say it, Austin, is, one of the things that makes the United States of America a leader around the world in safe, reliable operations of nuclear power is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They are the model for the world on how to regulate nuclear. But at the same time, I think there are places where we need to recognize, as we design in simplicity and better safety, or safety in a simpler way, then the licensing regulatory process and burden needs to recognize that and acknowledge that and reward that, if you will, with reduced requirements on the back end. And so there's a lot of work, bills out there floating around right now that have been moving around along to put more pressure on the NRC to improve their processes and get more efficiency there. So we need more predictability around the fact that they'll be able to license those in a timely manner and a predictable manner. So I think the federal government acknowledges there's more that needs to be done. I think they're working very hard to figure out exactly what that is, and as I said, pretty bipartisan support on that. But we do also acknowledge a significant amount of support that has already been given, and again, what opportunities that has given us to explore this and move ahead.
And so, as we're discussing the future and looking ahead, maybe from the other side of things, right? From kind of the advancements and technologies and everything like that. What can we look forward to in the near term? Kind of what's next for Energy Northwest and for the region in terms of where we're heading here.
Well, in the near term, I think we will continue to try to develop renewable projects and look at possible forms of energy storage. We're in the process of submitting a concept paper to the State Department of Commerce for some funds potentially around a storage project to explore sort of a newer technology around storage. I think those kinds of things need to be looked at. We're looking at ideas of how can we better utilize the grid. How can utilities send signals to their customers that say, hey, if you didn't come home and immediately start running your laundry, at 6 p.m., right when the heat of the day is at a peak and your air conditioner's cranked up and you're also cooking dinner and you're also doing other things. If we could get you to smooth that out a bit and move that to a different time of day, I think there's things like that we need to help people understand and put in programs in place to try to help drive that. I think in the near term, there's going to be a lot of focus of trying to find things like that we can do. But the other thing I guess I have to throw in there, though, Austin, is on the flip side, we're going to continue to support electrification of transportation that's being pushed in the region, and electrification of building heating and things like that are also going to continue to cause our electrical load to grow up, or increase, right, to grow. So we're sort of chasing ourselves a little bit here, right? We're chasing a moving target. Every time we can make some improvements, add some new resources, we're adding load as well. I found it fascinating, a report I heard this week. In mid-August, when we had a heat wave in the region here, both Portland General Electric and Bonneville Power Administration were reporting record loads. Now think about that. These are record loads at temperatures that are 10 degrees less than what we had in the heat dome a couple years ago. And yet they had higher loads than during that heat dome when it was 118 degrees in Portland. So at least 10 degrees cooler now. So that means somewhere we've gotten other loads that have grown in the region. You think about something that we all use every day, whether we realize it or not. The data centers that have been established in this region and are continuing to grow and have announced significant growth in the region, they're going to need a lot of power. And we don't know where that power is going to come from. So we have to figure out how do we provide them clean, firm, but 24/7, 365 power, because no one wants our phones to quit working, just because the sun went down at night or the wind stopped blowing. So there are a lot of challenges coming at us that every step we take, we have the risk of being a step behind still. One of the things I think I also like to help people realize is, again, as early movers on wind and solar and batteries, I can tell you that we've faced very heavily that these projects have roughly a 20 to 25 year general life, and then you have to be replacing or refurbishing them. So you think about every megawatt of wind or solar or even batteries that we have on the system today may not really get us any closer to being ready for 2045, because they're all going to have to be rebuilt or replaced by 2045. So we have a major challenge ahead of us. We have to be moving ahead with urgency to create resources, wind, solar, batteries. But boy, we shouldn't be thinking about taking any good resources like Columbia Generating Station or hydro facilities offline in the midst of that battle, or we'll truly be one step forward, 10 steps backwards, or even more. So, but in the near term for Energy Northwest, we're going to do everything we can to explore all technologies and options that we think are going to help, and that our member utilities or other utilities tell us that they need and want us to develop. And that's our vision, and that's our mission, and that's our goal.
Well, we're glad to have you on board as members of ours, and glad to be supportive of all the work that you're doing. And I know we're winding down on time here today, but there's, I'm sure, so much that we could probably still cover. I'll leave you with our last question, which is always kind of a bit of a curveball that we like to throw. But I think it's a good one, and it's trying to kind of break away from everything that we've discussed more in the sort of energy world and hydro and today nuclear, all that, and get back to helping people get to know you a little bit better. And the way we do that is we ask everyone to try and provide us with a little piece of like closing out life advice. So breaking away from like all the work stuff and just getting back to what are you all about? What do you live by? And what could you maybe pass along to our audience that they would appreciate and be able to maybe learn something from moving forward after today's episode?
So at the risk of giving an answer too quickly and maybe not the one I give, but I think this is one that I talk about quite a bit. I'll just say this. I encourage everybody to be set a goal of being a lifelong learner. Never assume that you've got all the answers. Never assume that you've arrived, that you know that all your opinions are right, and that you know everything you need to know. Be a lifelong learner, and I mean that just about not just learning information, but constantly trying to improve yourself as a person, as a human being, as a contributing member of society. And that requires, an attitude of lifelong learning. So it's one that I've tried to apply in my life, both professionally and personally, one that I've really tried to encourage my kids to employ as they go forward, and one that, again, I would encourage everyone to think about at this time of transition in particular. It's easy, and in today's, I guess, political world, it's easy for us to settle in and think that we know all the answers and that we have all the information we need. But I encourage everyone to be a lifelong learner. Sometimes that means, I hate to say it, I'm going to step on some toes. Sometimes that means you might have to listen to some different voices than you maybe would normally listen to. But that's part of learning, right? Is we're gathering information, we're hearing how other people think and view things, and maybe being open to realize that, hey, I remember something I thought when I was 20, and now I look back and think that's crazy. Maybe 10 years from now, I'll look back at something I think now and think that's crazy. And I need to just constantly be open in my mind to, I could learn something. I could learn enough that might cause me to change my mind on something.
Well, I think that today I learned quite a bit myself, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the knowledge that you were able to share with us today, based on all the learning that you've been doing in this field for the last, what is it, nearly 30 years, you said. So, really appreciate that. Really appreciate your advice as well, and thank you for making the time to join us on DAM today.
I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed it, and appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to hear from your future guests as well.
I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to have Greg on today's podcast, as the work they're doing over there at Energy Northwest is essential to moving the needle on our clean energy goals. What I wasn't expecting was how well he could concisely describe energy concepts in a way that, quite frankly, we're always struggling to do here. It's not easy to condense such nuanced ideas into a simple sentence, but he did it with ease while weaving it into today's discussion, and I'm going to have to take some notes on what he said and how well he said it. There's also so much more I wanted to ask him, but I think we prioritized and hit on the topics we needed to. Obviously, nuclear is going to deserve more airtime here on the podcast, and I think I'll be saving some of those questions for the future. Greg mentioned a few organizations they're working with to develop these new SMR projects, and we may just have some feelers out there to see if we can get one of them here on DAM. Now, I always ask you for your feedback, but today I really mean it. I was told that in order for this podcast to happen, it was a requirement that I provide your feedback to Greg so he can take it into consideration when having discussions like this in the future. So listen, if I don't get any feedback from you, I'm going to be in trouble. All you have to do to save my bacon is go to our website, nwriverpartners.org, and fill out a contact form on there. Or you can email us directly at info@nwriverpartners.org. Tell me what you thought of Greg in as many or few words as you'd like. And while you're at it, you can also let me know what you think of the podcast as a whole and who you want to hear on future episodes or what topics you'd like us to cover. Or you can just stick with feedback for Greg. It's totally your call. But hey, if you actually follow through, I might just have to send you one of those coveted Save Our Dam stickers as a reward. Now, my begging and pleading doesn't end there because there's also this thing called reviews, and receiving positive ones is essential to helping us grow and keep doing this thing. If you leave a 5-star review on the listening platform you're currently on, just like that, you've helped us out. And hey, while you're tapping away, you should tap on the bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss any future episodes, which arrive every other Friday. In the meantime, visit us at NW River Partners on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn to stay in the loop. And if you're feeling like you're in the sharing sort of mood and want to connect with us, you can throw up a water power post of your own and use the hashtag #OurPowerIsWater, and we'd appreciate seeing those. As always, speaking of appreciation, I appreciate you listening, and until next time, see ya.